and welcome everyone. We've got a complex challenge before us all that we're talking about today. We're all familiar with the United Nations Charter of the, or it's not, the United Nations Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities. And so I think many of us are trying to find better ways to give individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome a stronger voice. And so that sort of concept, exploring how that might be possible, I suppose is the crux of what we hope to talk about today. And hopefully you can all join in the conversation, because I'm sure you've all got ideas on what it might look like and how it might work. But first of all, we're going to hear from Elisabeth Dykens. She's a clinical psychologist and professor of psychology and human development at the Vanderbilt University. She has broad clinical research and policy experience in the fields of intellectual development disabilities. For many years, she has been focused on understanding the strengths and challenges of people with genetic syndromes, in particular, Prader-Willi syndrome and Williams syndrome. Most recently, her lab has been conducting behavioural interventions in both Prader-Willi and in Williams, and managing industry-sponsored clinical trials for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. I personally was very fortunate to meet Elisabeth, or the two Elisabeths, Elisabeth Ruth and Elisabeth Dykens at Vanderbilt, and certainly I was very impressed with the research that they do there, particularly the fact that they try and have an outcome, a benefit for the people involved in the research, and the benefit must be immediate. Otherwise, the person wanting to conduct the research is not allowed to conduct it at the university. So to me, that made a big impression. But I'd like to hand over to Elisabeth, who's going to give us a short didactic on the research they do.
So I want to thank the organizers for this invitation. In listening to the introductions, I was impressed at the diversity and the international presence of this audience. I think it's what an impressive group. I have to admit, this is the first time I've given a presentation at 3 o'clock in the morning, so you'll have to excuse me if I'm a little rusty. I also wanted to say it's a first for me as well, in that the research I'm presenting briefly this morning, this evening, this afternoon, is a qualitative study. And I am, as a clinical psychologist, I'm used to number crunching, statistics, data analyses, and doing more quantitative studies in the field. So this is a first for me to really dive in to the field of qualitative research, and it has been a real learning experience for me, and I've truly enjoyed it. I'd also like to thank Elisabeth Ruth, my colleague at Vanderbilt, and Haley Hunt-Hawkins, also my colleague at Vanderbilt. They're the two individuals that actually conducted the interviews that I'm going to be presenting today. So the rationale for this study, which was an interview study of youth and young adults with Prader-Willi syndrome, is that people with Prader-Willi syndrome obviously have important perspectives to share about themselves, their syndrome, and future treatments. And their insights stand to deepen our understandings of the PWS phenotype and also inform research and future clinical trials. There was another compelling rationale for this project, and that is that the United States Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, had requested that we provide them with patient versus proxy or parental perspectives on future clinical trials. And with that charge, the Foundation for Prader-Willi Research here in the United States commissioned our lab to engage in this interview study of young adults with Prader-Willi syndrome and try to provide their perspective, not only on how they perceive themselves, but what their perspectives are on clinical trials as well and future medicines for the condition. So this was again, predominantly a qualitative study. We used purposive sampling, which essentially means that we recruited individuals who we knew and who we surmised would be cooperative, interested in the project, and with the requisite verbal and cognitive skills to be able to respond to interview questions. We conducted semi-structured interviews, and they were recorded via Zoom. And the semi-structured interviews had two major parts. The first part asked individuals to reflect on how they felt Prader-Willi syndrome affected them in their everyday lives, what having PWS meant to them, and as a probe, if needed, what do you need help with because of PWS? And secondarily, we asked individuals about their opinions and perspectives about new medicines for Prader-Willi syndrome and how these, what their preferences are and how these medicines might impact them or their peers. So there are a lot of different ways that one can analyze qualitative data. I used an applied thematic analysis approach. And in this approach, it's content-driven. And the aim is to identify key themes in the interviews. It also allows for some quantitative analyses to further probe data. And in this case, I used frequency counts and chi-squares, for example. The focus is on identifying both implicit and explicit ideas or themes within the data. Data collection analyses are systematic and transparent. And again, there are many different ways of analyzing qualitative data, but this is the one that made the most sense for me. So what does that mean? We took those transcribed interviews, they were transcribed verbatim, entered into a secure database. Both Haley and myself and Elisabeth gave the transcripts multiple readings. From those transcripts, we extracted approximately 275 significant statements. We generated an initial coding system. We then revised that coding system. We discussed it with the team, and we coded until consensus of the data was achieved. We then revisited the full transcripts to ensure that we didn't miss any significant statements. And there are techniques in this approach where you look at the trustworthiness of the data via audit trails. We used a team approach, as well as getting expert reviews of transcript and findings. And we also have recontacted some of our participants to make sure that the themes made sense to them as well. So these are the characteristics of the 21 participants that we included, that you can see that their average age was about 20. They ranged in age from 14 to 38. We had a balance of both males and females. About half were in school, half had graduated. All of them were living at home. You can see their verbal and composite IQ levels, so a fairly wide range of cognitive functioning, as well as a wide range of the PWS genetic subtypes. So we really wanted to represent all of the subtypes of PWS and also aim to get a fairly wide cognitive range. And those cognitive scores were based on, or cognitive levels were based on our previous administrations of the Kaufman Assessment Battery for Children, the Kaufman Brief Intelligence Test. So, most participants, 71%, were very responsive, highly engaged with the interviews. They enjoyed them. However, 6 individuals had difficulty either understanding the questions or verbally expressing their ideas. Their responses tended to be sparse. They lacked spontaneity. They were apt to repeat prompts from the interviewers or simply state, "I don't know." And both Elisabeth and Haley engaged in extensive scaffolding with them, reframing questions. They tried valiantly to try to get some response, but it was very difficult. Now, these 6 less responsive participants were all young women. 2 had type 1 deletions, 2 had type 2 deletions, and 2 had MUPD. Interestingly, these 6 young ladies did not differ in age, genetic subtypes, or the level of their cognitive functioning from their counterparts who were more responsive. And I'll have more to say about the implications of that in a little bit. So these percentages then of the different themes and sub-themes that we identified were based on 15 participants who were able to express their ideas in ways that we could code and reliably code. So we identified 4 themes in a number of sub-themes. The first theme, and you can see there are 2 broad categories as well, which basically followed along the structure of the interview. So what does Prader-Willi syndrome mean to you? Well, 100% of respondents said it means struggling with hunger, food, and eating. Sub-themes here are weight loss is hard, the negative impacts of struggling with food and eating and hunger on relationships and life choices. And then about 60% as well offered some strategies that they use to help them manage their food-seeking behaviors and hunger. Second theme was struggling with anxiety, stress, and outbursts. And about 84% of respondents offered that theme. Not surprisingly, schedule changes were identified as a source of stress and a trigger for them. And surprisingly as well, 67% said that school was a stressor for them. I'll have more to say about that in a minute. About 60% of participants engaged in different tactics that represented different ways that they were distancing themselves from having Prader-Willi syndrome, which I found very interesting. And in the second part of the interview, what does Prader-Willi syndrome need in terms of new medicines or clinical trials? All participants said, we need new medicines. And they wanted new medicines that had had some diverse impacts that targeted hunger and anxiety and outburst, improved relationships, meeting my life goals. About half said they wanted a cure for the syndrome. And half, in terms of the fourth theme, expressed the need for increased self-advocacy and public and drug company awareness of Prader-Willi syndrome. So I'm going to go through and show you some quotes that represent these themes and sub-themes. So here's theme 1, struggling with hunger and food seeking. I'm not going to read all of them. You can certainly skim them yourself, but for example, at home, if food left out is just calling to me, it kind of feels like I can't think of anything else until I eat it. Food is like waking me up in the morning. You know you have it and it's life-threatening like cancer. You have it forever. It's a poisonous drug that kills me. I just feel hungry. I just feel bad and I really can't have anything. I got to eat something, but I can't. I get hungry and start to be upset and get angry. It calms me down by eating. It's hard to ignore being hungry. So clearly a strong vocabulary and strong negative valence here. Struggles with weight, about only compared to the struggles with hunger and food seeking, about half of respondents mentioned their difficulties with maintaining a healthy weight. Why did I gain weight when I exercised and ate 1,000 calories? My parents locked the pantry and stuff, and that's for me. Some advice here, parents, tell your kids about PWS at the right age, then you can help them manage food. My parents help by locking me up. I'm good at my own diet, I do well. And the negative impacts that they mention in terms of the negative impact of hyperphagia on their life choices. It affects my family because when I'm full of temptation, you can't do anything and it affects everyone. It just sucks the whole time, says Cody. I can't go to social things with my families. It affects living on my own. It affects the jobs you get and how things go in the community. You can't go where they have food around. It affects me mostly by socializing because school usually has some social thing and there's going to be food. And then this interesting emergent theme, the interviewers didn't ask for management strategies, but interviewees offered them nonetheless. These are techniques that they found helpful in managing their food seeking. Sometimes I put notes on my hands to remember things. So tomorrow there is going to be a girls' track meet and there's going to be cookies. So the note would warn me, don't go. I need help with the laundry because it's in the kitchen, and nope, I don't go in the kitchen. So have the laundry out of the kitchen. It would be helpful to find ways to explain PWS to other kids so that they can help you. Say, hey, you're not supposed to take that. It's out of my control, but you can learn things to do, like eating snacks in between meals. And I know when my meal times are, so I feel hungry then. When I want to eat more, I let my stomach settle for 5 minutes. And one person sort of relied on the social mores against stealing as a way of handling that. So there's only one job for us, and that's the cash register where people order the food. But you can hand them the food and not eat it because they paid for it and they get to have it, not you. So some takeaways from that first theme. Comments about hunger had a strong negative emotional valence. I think people were concerned about weight. Clearly, they want to have food, but they can't. There's the struggle, of course, that we're all familiar with. You want to have food, but you can't or shouldn't. Comments about weight were less frequent and less emotionally charged. And indeed, people commented that their family helps them with food security. So in both the frequency and the tone of their remarks, weight management seemed to pale in significance compared to the salient unremitting hunger. I think these findings underscore that in clinical trials, really, although some companies are tempted to use weight or BMI as a primary endpoint, really it's hyperphagia that's key here, because people, as we know, can be hyperphagic regardless of their weight. And so the use of, for example, the hyperphagia questionnaire or other biomarkers of hyperphagia, I think are what current and previous and future clinical trials are looking to as an endpoint. And I was intrigued by these food management strategies that people self-reported. Many of them are familiar to us and are recommended by dietitians in the field. But I think that encouraging people to identify what works for them may promote feelings of self-efficacy, although some of them, like avoiding social gatherings, may contribute to social isolation in a group that's already at risk for being socially marginalized. So it's interesting if you look at research on hunger in the general population, and I've listed some references here, but we know that hungry people in general have difficulty sustaining attention on food irrelevant tasks, and that thereby it compromises their general problem solving and planning skills and planning abilities. At the same time, hunger enhances memory of food stimuli and the abilities to solve food acquisition problems. And I'm sure all of you have stories to tell about how clever and ingenious some of the food-seeking behaviors are of people with Prader-Willi syndrome. Hunger is also associated with impulsivity, anxiety, irritability, aggression, and basic emotional processing. So hungry versus sated people are highly aroused by neutral stimuli and have difficulties differentiating emotionally salient from neutral stimuli. And, I wonder to what extent people with Prader-Willi syndrome also become emotionally aroused by neutral stimuli and have a harder time differentiating what's salient, emotionally salient from neutral things, perhaps contributing to their outbursts or anxiety. So there's obviously considerable overlap in the cognitive and psychological sequelae of hunger in the general population and the symptoms that we're familiar with of Prader-Willi syndrome. But I think caution is in order before reframing these many symptoms as simply a byproduct of hunger. So it's very challenging, as we know, to disentangle the extent to which hunger per se versus other genetic, cognitive, developmental, neural, or environmental factors contribute to these complex symptoms of Prader-Willi syndrome. And one participant, Cody, really said this beautifully. He said, "It's hard to figure out if PWS is just the hunger urges or if the hunger and anger issues and anxiety all go together. Yeah, it's hard to figure that one out." Well said, Cody. Okay, the second theme, anxiety and outbursts. Lots of mention about being worried, affecting me a lot. It's overwhelming. Anxiety is overwhelming. I'm getting nervous throughout the whole day. It's like every single second of the day for me. I'm just worried until something happens. Controlling emotions. I get mad easily. Sometimes I just lose my temper on something or get emotional. It's crazy, like the way I'm talking or whatever. When I get stressed, I get angry at stuff. It's like when I get too out of control, I can do bad things. And then another bad feeling comes in, like I could be out of my mind. Okay? Looking at triggers for anxiety or outbursts, predictably, unexpected events. If someone, it's much more difficult if something happens and I don't know about it, it throws a monkey wrench into my day. Whenever there's a change, it gets me upset. If they tell me ahead of time, I'm fine, not a big deal. If they tell me I'm late, I got really mad at work. My task got changed. It shocked me. And then that morning, the bus was late, really late, and I just couldn't handle it anymore. I was full on tantrum mode. When my mentor is running late, I'm worried that she's not going to be able to take me out, or if she's sick, or if she's in traffic, and I just don't know. And it's like waiting for hours for her to come, and it gets me worried and anxious. When someone says, no, I can't have this or that, I get mad. I get hungry, start to be upset. My mom starts things and then I get mad and stuff like that. My mom does things just to annoy me and I get mad. Sometimes I just take things the wrong way and then I get angry or in a bad mood. I'm sure that many of these comments are familiar to so many of you. It was interesting as well that so many respondents offered that school was a source of stress for them. And about half of these negative comments about school came from adults who had already graduated from school, suggesting that these experiences remained emotionally salient for them, even though they were no longer in school. So people noted learning difficulties. It's very hard to learn when you don't understand the material. It affects the way that I think or get things done. I get tests and a bad grade and have to retake the test. And there's another one right behind that. The stress, the anxiety, stress me out with homework. 3 people mentioned that they're treated rudely or poorly by others. Teachers or kids being rude, mean to me. They make fun of me and called me fat. That made me sad and down. Most guys don't accept me because of what I have. And then, of course, the food availability at school. It's really hard to stay with your diet. We go past the lockers and I'm thinking as I go past them, I wonder if somebody left some food in there. And then many comments about teachers using food in their lesson plans or in job training programs. One of my teachers last year had a lot of labs and each one of them involved food, science experiment with a candy called Skittles. In job training, I work on pizza. In another job training program, there was food around. I was sneaking food. They weren't willing to work with me. It didn't work out. So food is a stressor for them at school. So some takeaways here. I think there are lots of suggestions for schools that were indirectly suggested by these comments, including just the appreciation of how difficult it is knowing that food is available and at school and the use of food in lesson plans. But almost all interviews stated that for them, PWS meant that they struggled with stress. Stress was a word that came up a lot. Stress, anxiety, and outbursts. These statements were emotionally intense, anxious every second of the day. It's overwhelming. It's a lot for me. And I think the intensity of these statements have yet to be adequately captured in the literature, including in studies of psychiatric disorders in Prader-Willi syndrome. So we know that outbursts in Prader-Willi syndrome are related to difficulties with change and executive functioning deficits and task switching, thanks to Kate Woodcock and her exquisite work. And 2 interviewees suggested that, hey, just give me a heads up and then about a change, then I don't get upset. But we all know that in the flow of everyday life, unexpected things happen, which really points to a need for other sorts of interventions. And Kate Woodcock in her lab is engaged in identifying computer task switching games to help enhance task switching abilities, and also introducing low key changes and framed as spontaneous and fun into daily routines. And Lauren Kenworthy here at Penn has developed a curriculum to increase cognitive flexibility in children with autism called Unstuck and On Target. And I wonder, I think a lot of this curriculum could be pertinent for people with Prader-Willi syndrome as well, in terms of helping them with getting unstuck. So about 60% of respondents engaged in different tactics for really distancing themselves from having Prader-Willi syndrome. Two individuals kind of separated PWS from who they are. It's like when I get too out of control, I can do bad things, and it's not myself, it's the PWS. Or I won't be hungry, but my Prader-Willi will tell my brain that I'm still hungry. Then several folks denied or minimized PWS. I don't have it. I only have 3 pieces of it. 3 pieces is more like not having it at all. Some girls like fat guys. I don't tell others about PWS. I have a hard time. It's making me wish I didn't have PWS because I don't like it at all. I shouldn't even have this chromosomal anomaly that I got. Okay. Other tactics were saying that I'm really better or different than others. You know, other people can't have hamburgers or hot dogs. They do it anyway. And what do you think happens? They get fat. Not me. I can eat anything. Since my doctor told me that I'm one of the smartest ones, I watch what I eat. But it can be hard to be the smartest and not eat so much. Or some kids are tempted when they see something. They go and grab it and eat it. But that's not the case for me because I'm much better than that. PWS in mine works a little different. So kind of saying that they're better or different from others, or that they're the same as others. Losing weight, that's hard for everybody, even if they're normal. I want people to know we aren't really different, we are normal. So how do studies on the self-presentations of others with intellectual or developmental disabilities inform these findings, which I found really fascinating? We know, again, here some studies down here if you're interested, I have the references, but people with intellectual or developmental disabilities often engage in lateral or downward social comparisons to others. They're the same as typically developing people, or they're better than their peer group. And it's believed that such social comparisons help individuals to avoid the stigma associated with intellectual or developmental disabilities, and it helps them facilitate more positive self-representation. Other studies suggest that adults with IDD do not deem disability labels as important or central to who they are. They know that they're aware of that label, but it's just not central to who they are. And instead, they emphasize their competencies and activities, goals, and relationships that are important to them. Interestingly, however, in contrast to these disability studies, not one participant used the word disability to describe themselves, and the interview transcripts, did not include any mention of intellectual or developmental disabilities. So were respondents unaware of these labels, aware of them, but they did not deem them relevant or important? Did the demand characteristics of the interview with its focus on Prader-Willi overshadow any mention of disability? Regardless of the reason, I think it's a very intriguing possibility that people with PWS identify primarily with their syndrome and not necessarily with the clinical, research, or social designations of PWS as an intellectual or neurodevelopmental disability. Okay, on to new medicines. Everybody wanted new medicines, and everybody wanted to participate in clinical trials. What did they hope for in new medicines? The targets were hunger and anxiety. What would happen if they had new medicines? I could have like 10,000 calories, says Thomas. I'd be able to have the food not locked up. It's important to make just one medicine, not 7, says James, that would help us lose weight, help PWS kids feel good about themselves. Everything wouldn't be locked. You could do stuff without battling yourself, says Gabe. It would be different because you're not thinking about food all the time. What about medicines for anxiety? I would like it to not be so anxious and stressed out as much. I would like new medicine to control my temper. I would be happy. It would make my life better because you don't have to worry about feeling anxious. I want it to control hunger for the most part and have some of the anxiety stuff in it too, so it could help with the hunger and anxiety together, says Cody. And there were a lot of sort of downstream positive effects on the impact of new medicine. It would make me and my family a little happier. We wouldn't be yelling at each other all the time or hurting each other. Our family home would be much less stressful. My parents would be happier. I could do more things with my family. We could have a nice time here at home. Family would be happier. Because they wouldn't be trying to punish you. I would probably be able to have like a paying job. It would help people like us in the long run be more independent, work in a job where there's food. I could go to school. I want to go to college. It would make it easier to live on your own. I could, realize I want to be a veterinary assistant. I could cook on my own. I could live on my own. So lots and lots of lofty ideas about what new medicines should do or could do for PWS. Now, the interviewers never mentioned the word cure in their probes, yet about half respondents implied new medicines or trials as curative. Cure the hunger and completely cure the urge to seek food. The cure for us is a lot of things, says Sophie. I want something to help with everything. A new medicine for PWS should almost get rid of it. Help with the hunger, foods, and tiredness, and anxiety, and emotions too, all of them. I think that they should make a lot of different types of medicines for all the different effects of PWS. It would be a cure. Everyone with PWS could have the cure. Takeaways here, important ones, I think, in terms of managing expectations in clinical trials. I think particularly as people volunteer and go through the informed assent and consent process, it's important that these ideas about cure or the idea that somehow a new medicine will automatically lead to wonderful things needs to be taken into account, and people need to understand the risks, the benefits of participating in a trial in a realistic way, and also the fact that they might be on placebo versus an active agent. But I think these comments really underscore the importance of people running clinical trials to manage the expectations of individuals and their families. Certainly, we all hope that future clinical trials will help with the hunger and anxiety, but that's not going to immediately translate into meeting goals or aspirations. Hard work is still needed. New medicines may attenuate hunger or anxiety, and thereby providing new windows of opportunity for individuals to gain the supports they need and the interpersonal, adaptive, and vocational skills they need to achieve their goals, to go to college, to become a veterinary assistant, to live independently, and so on. Finally, the fifth theme, what PWS needs, is awareness and advocacy. A new medicine needs to help all people with PWS obesity in the world. I want the drug makers to allow everyone the opportunities to do the studies. A lot of them I can't do because I'm not in the age group. I want them to know about PWS and spread it all over the news. No one knows about it. There's even the butterfly syndrome where the skin cracks every time it moves, but PWS doesn't go up. If people were aware about it, they would start making new medicines. And Emily convincingly said, I want everyone to know that people with PWS can talk. They can. Like the drug companies were saying, my mom was saying that people with PWS can't explain things. They can. They can say what they need and want and what's hard for them. Their parents don't need to do it. They can explain it. Eloquent statements regarding the need for awareness and advocacy, and people can speak for themselves, right? And yet, keep in mind, despite our deliberate recruitment of individuals that we felt could answer these questions, and despite extensive scaffolding, 6 young women who we thought would be great candidates were not able to respond to interview questions. They were similar in age, subtypes, and levels of overall cognitive functioning as the others. Other factors were likely at play here, perhaps inattention, limited insight or capacities for abstraction or self-reflection. Perhaps they had difficulties recalling or organizing information, maybe some problems with the social demands of the interview. So in terms of implications for future clinical trials, it would be risky for pharma companies to assume that all participants with PWS can provide meaningful self-report clinical data. And it would also be risky to use cognitive functioning as a proxy for their ability to do so, because those 6 young ladies were similar to their counterparts who could provide responses. And I think to the extent that they can do so, clinical trial participants obviously need to share their perceptions of drug response or adverse events with their families and with study clinicians. Finally, I think I was very intrigued with the whole question that really was sprinkled throughout the interview data, and that is this question of who am I? And I think, youth and young adults developmentally are especially prone to ask, who am I? And I think the respondents in this study are saying, we're also asking, who am I in relation to PWS? Am I my syndrome? Am I different from my syndrome? And we know that self-perceptions, how we understand and perceive ourselves, these are not stable or monolithic constructs. They are fluid. We can differentiate different parts of the self, and our self-perceptions change in response to interactional demands and situational demands. And we know that constructing and revising and maintaining a sense of self is a lifelong process. So a question would be then, how do these self-perceptions of people with PWS change with advancing age and change with development? And I also think that future clinical trials really offer a unique opportunity to examine how possibly attenuated hyperphagia or anxiety impact the lived experiences and the self-perceptions of people with PWS. So I believe, yes, that is it. I'm going to stop there